Black girl brought breakfast to old man daily. One day, 50 limousines arrived and... A black girl brought breakfast to an old man daily, thinking she was just helping a lonely neighbor at the end of the street. Every morning, he thanked her. Every morning, he stared at her face. Fighting back tears, he never explained. She thought he was just lonely. She had no idea he was watching the past walk back into his life. Then one morning, the street shuts down. Sirens echo. Security floods the block, and 50 black limousines arrive. The quiet old man isn't just a neighbor. He's a powerful billionaire hiding a secret that's been buried for decades. Because years ago, his daughter was stolen, never found. Until now. The girl's mother is forced to face a truth she ran from her entire life, and the man has only days left to make things right. But some secrets heal, and others destroy everything they touch. So when kindness uncovers a truth this big, will this reunion save a broken family? Or will the past take everything from them all over again? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The sky was still dark when Nia Brooks opened her eyes, but she knew exactly what time it was. Every morning at 5:30, her internal clock would wake her, just like her mother had taught her. She didn't need an alarm. This was their special time together. Quietly padding down the hallway in her fuzzy pink socks, Nia found her mother already in their small kitchen, measuring coffee grounds into the filter. The familiar scent made her smile. "Good morning, baby," Rochelle said softly, reaching out to smooth Nia's curly hair. "Ready to help?" Nia nodded, moving to the refrigerator to get the eggs. This was their morning ritual, one they'd been doing for months now. The kitchen was peaceful in the pre-dawn quiet, just the soft clicking of the gas stove and the gentle clink of plates as mother and daughter worked side by side. "2 eggs today?" Nia asked, already knowing the answer. "It was always 2 eggs, scrambled just right, not too dry." "That's right," Rochelle confirmed, pulling out 2 pieces of wheat bread for the toaster. "And remember, not too much pepper," Nia finished with a grin. She'd memorized exactly how Mr. Whitmore liked his breakfast. As they worked, Rochelle hummed softly, an old gospel tune her own mother used to sing. The sound filled their kitchen with warmth, mixing with the growing light of dawn that was starting to peek through their curtains. "Mama," Nia said, carefully folding the eggs onto a plate. "Why do you think Mr. Whitmore lives all alone in that big house?" Rochelle's hands paused briefly as she wrapped a banana in a paper napkin. "Sometimes people carry heavy things in their hearts, baby. Sometimes being alone feels safer." She reached for the clean dish towel they used to wrap the breakfast. "But that's why kindness matters so much. It reminds people they're not really alone. Even when they want to be?" Nia asked, watching her mother's careful movements. "Especially then." Rochelle's voice was gentle but firm. "Remember what I always tell you about kindness? It's a duty, not a favor," Nia recited, standing a little straighter. She loved the way her mother's eyes crinkled with pride whenever she remembered these important lessons. Together, they wrapped the breakfast carefully, the warm plate of eggs and toast, the banana, and a paper napkin, all bundled in the clean white dish towel. It was like wrapping a present every morning. Nia thought. "Now go on," Rochelle said, handing the package to Nia. "Straight there and straight back." The morning air was cool on Nia's face as she walked down their street. Most houses were still dark, but she could see a few kitchen lights clicking on, other families starting their days. Mr. Whitmore's house was at the very end, set back from the others. It was a big house, but it looked tired, like it needed someone to love it. As she approached the porch, Nia noticed Mr. Whitmore was already in his usual spot, sitting in the old wooden rocking chair. He always seemed to be waiting, though she never told him exactly when she'd come. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," she called out softly, climbing the creaky steps. The old man's face softened at the sight of her. "Good morning, Miss Nia." His voice was quiet, like he wasn't used to using it much. She handed him the breakfast bundle, and he accepted it with careful hands. But today was different. Instead of his usual quick thank you, he looked at her face for a long moment. Nia noticed his eyes seemed shinier than usual, almost like he might cry. "Is everything okay, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked, concerned. He blinked rapidly and tried to smile. Yes, of course. Thank you, dear. This is very kind." Something in his voice made Nia want to give him a hug, but she remembered her mother's rules about boundaries. Instead, she gave him her brightest smile. "You're welcome. Enjoy your breakfast." As she turned to leave, she heard his rocking chair creak, and his soft, "God bless you, child," followed her down the steps. That evening, after dinner and homework and her favorite TV show, Nia got ready for bed. As she brushed her teeth, she thought about Mr. Whitmore's strange look that morning. She wondered if maybe he was lonely, or if something had made him sad. Rochelle came in to tuck her in, smoothing the purple comforter around her daughter's shoulders. "Did you say your prayers?" "Almost," Nia said, folding her hands. She added a special prayer for Mr. Whitmore, asking God to help him not be sad. After kissing Nia's forehead, Rochelle lingered in the doorway. The streetlight outside cast a soft glow through the window, illuminating her daughter's peaceful face. She watched the gentle rise and fall of Nia's chest as sleep quickly claimed her. Rochelle's own prayer was silent but fierce. She prayed that her daughter's generous heart would always be protected, that her kindness would never bring her harm. In their world, she knew too well how quickly joy could turn to sorrow, how trust could be broken. But she also knew that living in fear was no way to live at all. Standing there in the quiet darkness, Rochelle wrapped her arms around herself, watching over her sleeping child. The simple act of sharing breakfast with a lonely neighbor seemed innocent enough, but something about Mr. Whitmore's emotional reaction that morning had stirred an old uneasiness in her heart. Yet she pushed the feeling away, reminding herself that good deeds were like lights in the darkness. They showed the way forward, even when the path ahead was unclear. The morning sun painted long shadows across Nia's familiar path as she carried today's breakfast, wrapped in her mother's favorite blue checkered cloth. The weight of the warm container felt comforting in her small hands as she made her way down Cedar Street toward Mr. Whitmore's house. Like always, her sneakers made soft scuffing sounds against the sidewalk, and the early birds sang their morning songs. Today felt different, though. When Mr. Whitmore opened his door, his usual quiet demeanor seemed to shift. His weathered face held more than just its typical politeness. There was a spark of something else in his eyes, like someone waking up from a long sleep. "Good morning, Nia," he said, accepting the breakfast container. But instead of his usual gentle nod and retreat inside, he lingered in the doorway. How is school going for you?" The question surprised her. In all the months she'd been bringing breakfast, they'd never really talked beyond simple greetings. "It's good," she answered, rocking slightly on her heels. "I really like my science class. We're learning about butterflies." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Butterflies? Those are beautiful creatures. Do you have a favorite color?" "Purple," Nia said without hesitation, warming to the conversation. "Mom says it's the color of royalty, but I just think it's pretty." Something flickered across Mr. Whitmore's face at the mention of her mother. His hands tightened slightly on the container. "Your mother. Does she ever tell you stories about when she was your age? About her childhood?" Nia shook her head, her braids swaying. Not really. Mom doesn't talk much about when she was little. She giggled at the thought of her strong, serious mother as a child. The sound seemed to startle Mr. Whitmore. His breath caught, and she noticed his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, Nia," he said softly, his voice unsteady. "You're a very special young lady, just like—" He stopped himself, nodding quickly before stepping back inside. After the door closed, Elias Whitmore moved through his quiet house with purpose, his breakfast forgotten on the kitchen counter. In his study, he knelt before an old safe tucked beneath his desk. The combination came to his fingers automatically, 25 years of muscle memory. Inside lay a metal box, its surface dulled by time. His hands shook as he lifted the lid. The contents inside told a story of heartbreak and desperate searching. Newspaper clippings yellowed with age, dozens of photographs showing a smiling little girl with bright eyes, and police reports stamped with red letters spelling "missing" across the top. He touched one photo gently, tracing the outline of a child's face that had haunted his dreams for decades. Miles away, in the small insurance office where she worked, Rochelle Brooks pressed her fingers to her temples. The headache had come out of nowhere, sharp and insistent. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on her breathing like her therapist had taught her. But instead of calm, a fragment of something else flashed through her mind. Crisp winter air burning her lungs, the grip of unfamiliar fingers on her arm, the beginning of a scream that disappeared into darkness. The memory, if that's what it was, slipped away like water through her fingers, leaving only an uneasy feeling in its wake. Just stress. She muttered, reaching for the bottle of aspirin in her desk drawer. The quarterly reports were due, and she'd been working extra hours. That's all it was. She pushed away the nagging sensation that had been growing stronger lately, the feeling that something was trying to surface in her mind. Her computer screen showed 2:30 in the afternoon. In a few hours, Nia would be home from school, filling their small house with stories about her day. Rochelle focused on that thought, on the solid reality of her present life, letting it anchor her against the strange tide of unease. The headache gradually subsided, but the echo of that half-remembered moment lingered, like a shadow at the edge of her vision. She immersed herself in spreadsheets and client emails, determined to keep her mind occupied with the concrete details of her daily routine. Yet somewhere in the back of her mind, a door that had been locked for 25 years had begun to crack open, letting in whispers of a past she had taught herself to forget. The morning sky hung heavy with dark clouds as Nia stepped out of her house, carefully balancing the wrapped breakfast in her hands. The air felt thick and damp, warning of the storm to come. She had barely made it halfway down the street when the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a steady downpour. By the time she reached Mr. Whitmore's porch, her jacket was soaked through, though she'd managed to keep the breakfast dry by hugging it close to her chest. The old wooden porch creaked as she hurried under its shelter, water dripping from her braids. The door opened before she could knock. "Good heavens, child, you're soaked through," Elias said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Please, come inside where it's warm, just for a moment until the rain lets up." Nia hesitated, remembering her mother's rules about entering strangers' homes. But Mr. Whitmore didn't feel like a stranger anymore, and the rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the porch roof. "I can make you some tea," he offered gently, "to warm you up." The house was neat but sparse, with furniture that looked barely used. Nia followed him to a small kitchen where an old kettle sat on the stove. The walls were bare except for a single calendar, its pages crisp as though rarely turned. "Chamomile or peppermint?" Elias asked, reaching for a wooden box of tea bags. "Peppermint, please," Nia replied, setting his breakfast on the counter. My mum likes peppermint tea when she comes home from her night shift. Elias's hand slowed as he prepared the tea. Your mother works nights too. Nia nodded, accepting the steaming mug with both hands. At the hospital. She's a cleaning lady there. And during the day, she works at the grocery store. She blew carefully across the surface of her tea. She says working hard is how you show love. Something flickered across Elias's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. He turned away quickly, busying himself with unwrapping his breakfast. That must be difficult for both of you. Sometimes I don't see her much, Nia admitted. But she always makes time for breakfast, says it's the most important meal 'cause it sets the tone for your whole day. She smiled, remembering her mother's words. That's why we make sure you get breakfast too. The rain continued to pour outside as they sat in comfortable silence, Nia sipping her tea, while Elias ate small, careful bites of toast. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking the peaceful moments. When the rain finally began to ease, Elias walked Nia to the door. But instead of their usual goodbye, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. For bus money, he said softly, pressing it into her hand. The weather's getting colder, and you shouldn't have to walk everywhere. Oh, but I don't mind walking. Nia started to protest, but Elias had already closed her fingers around the envelope. Please, he said. It would make an old man feel better. After Nia left, Elias watched through his window until her small figure disappeared around the corner. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. James, he said when his attorney answered. I need you to come by tomorrow. It's time to put things in order. He listened for a moment, then added, Yes, all of it. And I need you to schedule that appointment at Memorial Hospital, the one we discussed. Later that evening, Elias sat in his study, a single lamp casting yellow light across his desk. In front of him lay a crisp white envelope from Memorial Hospital, the paper still creased from where he'd carried it in his pocket for weeks, afraid to open it. Now he smoothed it flat with trembling fingers and read the words again. Stage 4. Terminal. 6 months. Maybe less. The diagnosis wasn't a surprise. He'd known something was wrong for months, but seeing it in stark medical terms made it real. Final. His hands didn't shake anymore as he placed the report back in its envelope. The fear that had kept him from making this decision was gone, replaced by a calm certainty. Time, which had seemed like his enemy for so many years as he searched, had suddenly become precious. Limited. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough to do what needed to be done. Outside his window, the rain had stopped. The streetlights cast long shadows across his front yard, where small puddles reflected the night sky. In one of those houses down the street, a little girl who brought him breakfast every morning was probably getting ready for bed, unaware that her simple act of kindness had shifted something fundamental in the world. Elias stood at his window for a long time, watching the water slowly drain away from the sidewalk where Nia's footprints had been just hours before. The medical report sat on his desk behind him, its message clear and final, but for the first time in years he felt something like peace. The afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Rochelle sorted through Nia's backpack, checking for homework assignments and notes from teachers. Her fingers brushed against something unfamiliar, a crisp white envelope tucked into a side pocket. She pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat when she felt its weight. Nia, she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. Could you come here for a minute? Nia appeared in the doorway, still wearing her school clothes, her expression changing from cheerful to concerned when she saw the envelope in her mother's hand. Oh, that's from Mr. Whitmore, she said quietly. For bus money, he said. Rochelle sat down at the kitchen table, motioning for Nia to join her. The wooden chair creaked as she leaned forward, placing the envelope between them. "Baby, we need to talk about this. We don't take money from strangers." "But he's not really a stranger anymore, Mama," Nia protested, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I've been bringing him breakfast every morning for weeks now." "That's different," Rochelle said, running her thumb along the envelope's sealed edge. "Sharing food is one thing. Money is something else entirely." Her voice softened as she remembered her own mother's warnings about pride and necessity, about the fine line between kindness and dependency. Nia's eyes welled up with tears, but she blinked them back. "He never asks for anything, Mama. He just listens. When I tell him about school, or about the birds I see on my way there, or about anything, really, he looks at me like what I'm saying matters." Rochelle felt something twist in her chest. Recognition, perhaps, or worry. Or both. "Tell me more about these conversations," she said, pushing the envelope aside for now. "Well, yesterday when it was raining he made me tea. Regular tea, nothing fancy," Nia added quickly, seeing her mother's expression. "And he asked about you working so hard at both jobs. He seemed sad about that." Rochelle's fingers drummed against the table. "Sad how?" "Like when Ms. Peterson at school found out Jimmy didn't have lunch money. That kind of sad. Like he wanted to help but wasn't sure if he should." The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Rochelle studied her daughter's face, seeing the earnest concern there, the genuine affection for the old man who lived in that weathered house at the end of the street. "You really care about him, don't you?" Rochelle asked softly. Nia nodded. "He's lonely, Mama. Sometimes his hands shake when he takes the breakfast bag, like he's not used to people being nice to him." Rochelle closed her eyes for a moment, remembering countless acts of kindness from strangers during her own difficult times, times she tried not to think about, memories that stayed locked away in the deepest corners of her mind. When she opened them again, she'd made a decision. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," she said, picking up the envelope. "Tomorrow morning I'm coming with you to deliver breakfast. I need to meet this Mr. Whitmore myself, and we're giving this back to him, properly, with thanks." Relief flooded Nia's face. "Really? You'll come?" "Really," Rochelle confirmed, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "But no more accepting money or gifts without telling me first. Understood?" "Yes, Mama. I promise." Meanwhile, across town in a sterile medical office, Elias Whitmore sat perfectly still as his private physician, Dr. Marcus Chen, reviewed the latest test results. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the polished hardwood floor of the consultation room, so different from standard hospital rooms, but carrying the same weight of significance. "The timeline hasn't changed, Elias," Dr. Chen said gently, setting down the tablet containing the scan results. "We're looking at months, not years. The treatments might buy you some additional time, but quality of life would be significantly diminished." Elias finished, his voice remarkably steady. He'd had weeks to process this reality, yet saying it aloud still felt surreal. Dr. Chen nodded, leaning forward in his chair. "Are you sure you don't want to start the treatments? Even a few more months would delay what needs to be done," Elias interrupted softly. He pulled out his phone, quickly typing a message to his personal assistant. "Sarah, please begin preparations for a gathering at the house. Details to follow." "A gathering?" Dr. Chen asked, surprise evident in his tone. In 20 years of treating Elias Whitmore, he'd never known the man to host any social events. Elias tucked his phone away, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's time to change everything," he said simply. "No more waiting." "Does this have something to do with the investigation you mentioned last time?" Dr. Chen asked carefully, aware of the sensitive nature of his patient's past. Elias stood up, straightening his jacket with careful movements. "It has everything to do with it," he replied, "and with a little girl who brings me breakfast every morning, not knowing she's delivering so much more than food." Dr. Chen watched as his patient walked to the door, noting how Elias's shoulders seemed lighter despite the heavy news they'd just discussed. "Elias," he called out, causing the older man to pause. "Whatever you're planning, just remember your limits. Physically, you need to be careful." Elias turned back, his eyes bright with something that looked remarkably like hope. "Some things are worth any cost, Marcus. I've waited far too long already." As the door closed behind him, Elias pulled out his phone again, scrolling through old photographs, frozen moments from decades past that he'd studied so often he'd memorized every detail. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed another message to Sarah. "Contact the security team. Have them bring me everything we have on Rochelle Brooks. It's time to close this chapter. The right way." The late afternoon traffic hummed outside as he made his way to his car, each step measured and deliberate. Tomorrow would bring Rochelle Brooks to his door, though she didn't know it yet. Tomorrow would begin the careful unraveling of a mystery that had consumed 3 decades of his life. Tomorrow would start the process of either healing or destroying what remained of his time on Earth. For now, though, he had preparations to make, and a story to finally bring to its conclusion. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with dew sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Rochelle adjusted her worn denim jacket, her fingers nervously smoothing the fabric as she and Nia walked down their familiar street. The morning routine felt different today, heavier somehow. "Remember what we talked about?" Rochelle reminded her daughter, her voice carrying a hint of worry. "We're just being neighborly, nothing more." Nia nodded, clutching the familiar cloth-wrapped breakfast bundle. "Mr. Whitmore is nice, Mama. He just likes to hear about my day." They approached the weathered house at the end of the street. Paint peeled from the window frames, and untrimmed bushes crowded the walkway. Rochelle's footsteps slowed as they neared the porch, an inexplicable heaviness settling in her chest. Nia bounded up the creaking steps with the comfort of familiarity, but before she could knock, the door opened. Elias Whitmore stood in the doorframe, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the porch. The moment his eyes met Rochelle's, time seemed to stop. His face drained of color, and his hands gripped the doorframe so tightly his knuckles turned white. A series of emotions flickered across his weathered features: shock, joy, grief, and something deeper that Rochelle couldn't name. "Rah." The syllable died on his lips as he caught himself. His hands trembled visibly as he cleared his throat. "Good morning," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. Rochelle felt strange, like the air had suddenly become too thick to breathe. A pressure built in her chest, familiar yet foreign, like a long-forgotten memory trying to surface. She pressed a hand to her sternum, trying to ease the sensation. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," she said politely, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I wanted to meet the kind gentleman my daughter's been visiting." Elias's eyes never left her face, drinking in every detail as if he were memorizing a precious painting. "The pleasure is mine," he responded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your daughter, she's very special." Nia, oblivious to the charged atmosphere, held out the breakfast bundle. "I made the toast myself today, Mr. Whitmore." His hands shook as he accepted the package, and for a moment his fingers brushed against Nia's. The simple contact seemed to steady him. "Thank you, dear one. Would you both like to come in for tea?" Rochelle shook her head, taking an involuntary step backward. Something about this man's intense gaze made her feel unsteady, like standing too close to the edge of a cliff. "We should be going. I have work, and Nia has school." "Of course." Elias said softly, his expression falling slightly. Perhaps another time. Rochelle nodded stiffly and turned away, reaching for Nia's hand. As they descended the porch steps, Elias's voice floated behind them, so quiet it might have been the whisper of leaves in the morning breeze. "I found you?" But Rochelle didn't hear the words, already hurrying down the sidewalk with Nia in tow, trying to outpace the strange feeling of recognition that threatened to overwhelm her. Inside his house, Elias watched through the window until they disappeared around the corner. His hands still trembled as he reached for his phone, pressing a single number on speed dial. "Marcus," he spoke into the phone, his voice now firm with purpose. "Initiate Protocol 7. I want every member of the global team here by tomorrow morning." He paused, looking at a folder on his desk containing DNA test results that confirmed what his heart had known the moment he saw Rochelle's face. "It's time." He ended the call and sank into his chair, emotion finally overtaking him. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he touched the breakfast bundle Nia had brought, still warm from their kitchen. After 25 years of searching, his lost child had been living just down the street, raising her own daughter with the same kindness that had once defined her mother. As evening settled over the neighborhood, cars began arriving at various hotels throughout the city. Discreet, expensive vehicles, carrying Elias Whitmore's most trusted employees. Tomorrow they would descend upon this quiet street, bringing with them the weight of truth and decades of searching. The street lay peaceful in the gathering darkness, unaware that by this time tomorrow everything would change. The simple rhythm of morning breakfasts and kindly exchanges would give way to revelations that would shatter the careful silence of 25 years. In his study, Elias carefully placed the DNA results back in their folder, alongside photographs and reports that documented a lifetime of searching. Tomorrow would bring either redemption or ruin, but tonight he simply sat in his chair, holding the breakfast bundle his granddaughter had brought him, and allowed himself to feel the full weight of finally finding his daughter. Dawn crept over the quiet neighborhood, its peace shattered by the low rumble of engines. Rochelle stirred in her bed, confused by the unusual sound. The noise grew louder, pulling her from sleep's embrace. She wrapped her robe tightly around herself and moved to the window, pushing aside the worn curtain. Her heart skipped a beat. The familiar street had transformed overnight. Black vehicles stretched as far as she could see, sleek limousines with tinted windows, large vans marked with security company logos, and TV news trucks with satellite dishes reaching towards the sky. Men in dark suits and earpieces stood at every corner, speaking into their wrists. "Mama?" Nia's voice came from behind her, small and uncertain. "What's happening?" Rochelle's hands trembled as she pulled Nia close. "I don't know, baby. Stay away from the windows." Blue and red lights flashed as police cars blocked both ends of the street. Neighbors emerged from their homes, phones held high to record the scene. The morning light caught the chrome and polish of the vehicles, making them gleam like an invasion of black beetles. A crowd gathered near Elias's house. Rochelle watched, her throat tight, as the door opened. The man who stepped out wasn't the quiet, shabby figure they knew. Elias Whitmore stood tall in a perfectly tailored charcoal coat, his silver hair neatly combed, his bearing commanding. He moved with purpose, flanked by men in suits who cleared a path through the growing crowd. "That can't be Mr. Whitmore," Nia whispered, pressing her face against the window despite her mother's warning. "He looks so different." Rochelle's head throbbed, something about his stance, the way he held his shoulders. It tugged at memories she'd buried long ago. The pressure in her chest returned, stronger than before. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. "Ms. Brooks?" A professional voice called. "Mr. Whitmore requests your presence outside." "Mama?" Nia's eyes were wide with worry. Rochelle squared her shoulders, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "Get dressed, baby. Quick now." They dressed hastily, Rochelle in her best work dress, Nia in her school clothes. When they opened their front door, 2 security guards stood waiting. The morning air felt electric, charged with anticipation and fear. Cameras flashed as they emerged. Rochelle pulled Nia behind her, shielding her from the lenses. The crowd parted, creating a path to where Elias stood. His face, usually soft with gratitude, now held a different kind of emotion, something raw and desperate. He stepped forward, microphones thrust toward him from all directions. His voice, amplified by speakers, rolled across the stunned neighborhood. 25 years ago, my daughter was stolen from me. I've spent every day since then searching, never losing hope. His voice broke. Today that search ends. Rochelle's knees went weak. The headache exploded behind her eyes, bringing flashes of memory, a playground, a stranger's voice, darkness. She gripped Nia's shoulders tighter. "Rochelle," Elias said, his voice gentle now, speaking directly to her. "You were only 5 years old when they took you. Your real name is Sarah Whitmore." The crowd gasped. Cameras clicked, rapidly. Rochelle felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "No," she whispered, but even as she denied it, locked doors in her mind began to open. "Your mother's name was Grace," Elias continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "She had a butterfly tattoo on her wrist. You loved strawberry ice cream and were afraid of thunderstorms. You disappeared from Butterfly Park on April 15th. Each detail hit like a physical blow. Rochelle remembered the butterfly, remembered a woman's laugh, remembered the taste of strawberry ice cream on a warm spring day. She remembered being afraid, so afraid. And then, nothing. Years of nothing. "DNA tests confirm it," Elias said, his voice carrying across the now silent street. "Welcome home, Sarah." Nia looked up at her mother, confusion and concern written across her young face. "Mama, is it true?" Rochelle couldn't answer. The memories were coming faster now. A big house with a red door, a room full of toys, a father who read her stories every night, a father whose face she now saw clearly in the man standing before her. The world spun. Security guards moved quickly as Rochelle's legs gave way. She heard Nia's frightened cry, felt strong hands catching her, saw Elias rushing forward. The last thing she remembered was his face, her father's face, hovering over her, saying words she couldn't hear as the morning light grew dim and the world faded to black. The crowd surged forward, reporters shouting questions, neighbors calling out in concern. Through it all, Nia stood frozen, watching as medical personnel emerged from one of the vans, rushing to her mother's side. She felt a gentle hand on her shoulder and looked up to find Elias, her grandfather, looking down at her with tears in his eyes. The quiet street would never be the same. In the space of a morning, their simple life had shattered like glass, leaving them standing amid the glittering pieces of a truth too big to comprehend. The morning sun filtered through heavy curtains in Elias Whitmore's study, casting long shadows across Persian rugs and leather-bound books. Rochelle sat rigid on an antique settee, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Nia pressed close to her side. The transformation of their elderly neighbor into this commanding presence made the familiar room feel foreign and intimidating. Elias stood by the fireplace, his fingers tracing the edge of a silver frame. His voice, when it finally came, was thick with emotion. "It was December 3rd, 25 years ago. You were playing in the front yard of our home in Connecticut." He turned the frame to show them a faded photograph of a small black girl in a red wool coat, building a snowman. "I had stepped inside for just a moment to answer the phone." Rochelle's breath caught. The image struck something deep within her, a fragment of memory she'd buried long ago. Her hands began to tremble. When I came back out, Elias continued, his voice breaking, you were gone. Just gone. The police found tiny footprints in the snow leading to tire tracks, but the trail went cold at the highway. He set the frame down carefully. I hired private investigators, offered rewards, searched every lead, every possibility. For 25 years, I never stopped looking. No, Rochelle whispered, then louder. No, you're lying. She shot to her feet, causing Nia to jump. If you looked so hard, why didn't you find me? Where were you when I was bouncing between foster homes? Where were you when I was 16 and scared and pregnant with no one to turn to? Her voice rose with each question, years of buried pain erupting like a volcano. Where were you when I had to drop out of school to work 2 jobs? When I was trying to figure out how to be a mother with no example to follow? Where were you then? Elias didn't try to defend himself. He stood there, accepting each accusation like a physical blow. I failed you, he said simply. Every day I failed you. Nia watched the scene unfold with wide eyes, her young mind piecing together the puzzle of her morning visits. That's why you always looked at me so strange, she said softly. You saw Mom in me. Elias nodded, tears now flowing freely down his weathered cheeks. Your eyes, he said. They're exactly like your mother's. The first morning you brought breakfast, I thought I was seeing a ghost. But I needed to be sure. I had DNA tests done discreetly. A hair from your coat, a fingerprint from the glass you used. I couldn't risk being wrong. Not again. DNA tests? Rochelle's voice was dangerous. You tested my daughter without my permission? I had to know, Elias pleaded. And once I knew for certain, I had to tell you the truth. I'm dying, Rochelle. Cancer. I have months left, maybe less. I couldn't leave this world without you knowing who you are, what was stolen from you. Rochelle sank back onto the settee, her anger momentarily displaced by shock. Nia reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it tight. Who I am? Rochelle's laugh was bitter. I know who I am. I'm the woman who built a life from nothing, who raised a daughter alone, who never needed anyone's help or pity. You're also Rochelle Elizabeth Whitmore, Elias said quietly. Sole heir to Whitmore Industries, a fortune that's rightfully yours, that should have been yours all along. He moved to his desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a thick folder. Everything is here. Birth certificate, trust documents, medical records, proof of who you were before they took you. Rochelle stared at the folder but didn't reach for it. And now what? You expect me to just accept this? To forget 25 years of abandonment because you show up with money and apologies? I expect nothing, Elias replied. I don't deserve forgiveness. I only ask for a chance to give you the truth, all of it. He glanced at the darkening sky outside. Stay tonight. Let me tell you about your mother, about the life you had, the life that was stolen, not for my sake, but for your own peace. Nia looked up at her mother, her face full of hope and worry. Please, Mom, just for tonight? Rochelle was quiet for a long moment, studying the man who claimed to be her father. The anger still burned, but beneath it was something else, a desperate need to understand, to fill in the blank pages of her past. One night, she finally said, her voice hard. Not for forgiveness, for answers. Elias nodded, relief and gratitude washing over his tired face. He picked up a small bell from his desk and rang it once. A uniformed staff member appeared almost instantly. Please show Ms. Brooks and Nia to the East Wing guest rooms, he instructed, and have dinner prepared for 7 o'clock. As they followed the staff member out, Nia paused in the doorway, looking back at Elias. All those mornings, she said thoughtfully. When I brought you breakfast, you were never really alone, were you? You had all this. She gestured at the grand house around them. I had everything, Elias replied softly, and nothing that mattered, until you started knocking on my door. Rochelle said nothing, but her hand tightened on Nia's shoulder as they walked away, leaving Elias standing in his study as the sunset painted the room in shades of gold and shadow. The evening sun cast long shadows through Elias's dining room windows as 3 place settings waited on the massive mahogany table. Crystal glasses caught the amber light, creating tiny rainbows on the crisp white tablecloth. The room felt too big, too formal for the delicate conversation about to unfold. Rochelle sat rigidly in her chair, her fingers fidgeting with the cloth napkin in her lap. The day's revelations had left her exhausted, but questions burned in her mind, demanding answers. Nia, seated between her mother and newly discovered grandfather, glanced between them with worried eyes. I had the chef prepare something simple, Elias said softly, breaking the tense silence. Comfort food seemed appropriate. A woman in a neat black uniform served steaming bowls of homemade chicken soup, fresh bread, and a garden salad. The familiar aroma reminded Rochelle of something just beyond her grasp, a memory trying to surface. I used to make you chicken soup when you were sick, Elias said, his voice rough with emotion. Your mother's recipe. You wouldn't eat anyone else's. Rochelle's spoon clattered against the bowl. I remember something, a blue blanket, the smell of soup. She pressed her fingers to her temples. It's like trying to catch smoke. Nia reached for her mother's hand. It's okay, Mama. Take your time. Elias watched them, his heart aching at their bond. Perhaps you could tell me what you do remember. After you were taken? Rochelle took a deep breath, her shoulders squaring. I was 15 when I ran away from the last foster home. The memories before that are broken. Fragments. Different. Houses, different names. Always moving. Her voice grew stronger, steadier. I lived on the streets for a while. Found work washing dishes. Learned to fade into the background. Nobody asked questions if you worked hard and kept quiet. Nia's eyes widened. She'd never heard these stories before. Her mother always said the past was best left alone. I was 17 when I got my GED. Rochelle continued. Worked my way through community college. Changed my name legally as soon as I could. The fear... She paused, swallowing hard. The fear never really went away. Always looking over my shoulder, never staying in one place too long. Until Nia. Elias's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. While you were surviving, I was searching. Every private investigator, every lead, every possible sighting. He gestured to the opulent room around them. I built Whitmore Industries from nothing, expanding into security systems, surveillance technology, missing persons databases. Everything I did, every company I acquired, was aimed at finding you. But you didn't, Rochelle said sharply. All your money, all your resources, and you didn't find me. No, Elias admitted, his voice heavy with regret. I failed you. Over and over I failed you, until your daughter's kindness led you right to my door. Nia spoke up, her voice small but clear. Is that why you always watched me so carefully? Because I reminded you of Mama? Elias nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. Your smile, the way you tilt your head when you're thinking, so much like your mother at your age. But it was your eyes that told me the truth. You have your grandmother's eyes. Rochelle's breath caught. My mother? I don't remember her at all. Sarah, Elias said softly. Her name was Sarah. She died 2 years after you were taken. The doctors said it was heart failure, but really—" He wiped his eyes. "She died of grief." The silence that followed was heavy with loss. Nea got up and walked to a large portrait on the wall, a beautiful black woman with kind eyes, seated in a garden. "That's her," Elias confirmed. "Your grandmother. She loved gardenias. The whole house used to smell of them." Rochelle closed her eyes, and suddenly the scent memory was there. Sweet flowers, warm sunshine, gentle hands braiding her hair. A sob caught in her throat. "I looked for you everywhere," Elias continued, his voice breaking. "Every dark-haired girl, every possible match. I never stopped. I couldn't. The day you were taken, I was supposed to pick you up from school. I was late, just 20 minutes late, caught in a meeting I thought I couldn't miss." His shoulders shook. 20 minutes that cost us 25 years. Nea returned to the table, her young face wise beyond her years. "But we're here now. That's what matters, right?" Rochelle looked at her daughter, this child who had unknowingly built a bridge across decades of pain with simple acts of kindness, who had seen an old man's loneliness and reached out with breakfast and conversation, who had brought light into darkness without even knowing it. "I was so angry," Rochelle whispered. "So angry for so long. At the people who took me, at the system that failed me, at the parents who never found me." She looked at Elias, really looked at him. "But you never stopped looking." "Never," he confirmed. "And I never will stop trying to make up for failing you that day." The weight of decades of loss, fear, and longing filled the room, but beneath it something else stirred, the possibility of healing, of understanding, of forgiveness. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but someday. Rochelle looked down at her father's weathered hand resting on the table. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out and placed her hand over his. The touch was light, tentative, but it carried the weight of mountains moved and bridges built. In that moment, 3 generations sat connected by touch, by blood, by love, and by the simple kindness of a child who chose to knock on a lonely man's door with breakfast. The morning sun painted gentle shadows across Elias's private garden, a hidden sanctuary behind his weathered house that few knew existed. Dew still clung to the petals of carefully tended roses, their deep reds and soft pinks standing in stark contrast to the emerald grass beneath. The air carried the sweet perfume of jasmine and memories that had waited decades to be shared. Elias's hands trembled slightly as he guided Rochelle and Nea along the stone path. He walked slower now, not from age but from the weight of the moment. "I planted this garden the year after you disappeared," he explained, his voice soft and careful. "Every spring I'd add something new, thinking maybe this would be the year you'd come home to see it bloom." Rochelle wrapped her arms around herself, taking in the perfectly maintained beds of flowers, each one selected and placed with purpose. Her eyes lingered on a small bench nestled beneath a flowering cherry tree. "You built all this for me? Every detail?" Elias nodded, watching as Nea crouched down to examine a cluster of bright yellow daffodils. "That bench. I used to sit there for hours, imagining what I would say when I finally found you. The words never seemed enough." Nea looked up at her mother, her young face full of wonder. "Mom, look at these! They're like tiny suns!" Her excitement cut through the heavy atmosphere, making both adults smile despite themselves. Rochelle felt something shift inside her as she watched her daughter explore the garden. The anger that had sustained her for so long began to soften around the edges. She could see traces of herself in the careful planning, the patient tending, the stubborn hope that had shaped this space. It was like looking at her own heart turned inside out, the way she'd created a home for Nia, never giving up even when times were hardest. "I never stopped looking," Elias said quietly, settling onto the bench. "Every lead, every possibility, I followed them all. Built the company just to have the resources to search wider, dig deeper." He patted the space beside him, and after a moment's hesitation, Rochelle sat down. "I used to dream about being found," she admitted, watching Nia examine a butterfly that had landed nearby. But after a while it hurt too much to hope. It was easier to forget, to become someone new. The morning passed in gentle conversation, punctuated by Nia's delighted discoveries. For a few precious hours they existed in a bubble where the past's sharp edges seemed less dangerous to touch. Rochelle found herself sharing small memories that had survived. The smell of her mother's perfume, the sound of Elias's laugh when he'd come home from work, the way he'd always checked under her bed for monsters. But peace, like morning dew, can evaporate quickly under harsh light. The first sign that something had changed came when Elias's security chief approached with rapid steps, his face tight with concern. He bent to whisper in Elias's ear, and the older man's expression darkened immediately. "What's wrong?" Rochelle asked, already feeling her walls beginning to rebuild themselves. Elias sighed heavily. "The story's leaked. It's all over the national news networks." He pulled out his phone, showing her the headlines that were already spreading like wildfire. "Whitmore heiress found after 25 years, and billionaire's long-lost daughter discovered living modest life." Rochelle's hands began to shake as she scrolled through the articles. Some painted her as a tragic victim. Others questioned whether she was an imposter seeking fortune. Photos of her house, her workplace, even Nia's school appeared alongside speculation about her life and character. "No, no, no," she whispered, standing abruptly. "This isn't... I can't..." The peaceful morning crumbled around her as reality crashed back in. The security chief's radio crackled. "Sir, Mr. Brooks is at the main gate. He's quite insistent about seeing his family." Nia's head snapped up at the mention of her father. "Daddy's here." Marcus Brooks's arrival was like a storm front moving in. He strode through the garden, his usual calm demeanor replaced by barely contained fury. His eyes locked onto Rochelle and Nia, checking them for any sign of distress. "What have you done?" he demanded, directing his words at Elias while pulling his family close. "There are reporters camped outside our house. Our neighbors are being harassed for interviews. Nia's school just called asking how to handle media requests." Elias stood slowly, his face drawn with concern. "I assure you, this leak didn't come from my team. We're already tracking down the source. Your assurances don't mean anything to me." Marcus cut him off. "You show up with your money and your influence, thinking you can just insert yourself into our lives. We were happy before this. We were safe." "Marcus, please." Rochelle touched his arm, but she could feel the tension radiating through him. "Have you seen what they're saying about you online?" Marcus pulled out his phone, his hand shaking with anger. "They're picking apart every detail of your life, our life. Some are calling you a gold digger, others are spinning conspiracy theories about where you've been all these years." Nia pressed closer to her father's side, her earlier joy replaced by uncertainty. "Dad, why are people saying mean things about Mom?" The question seemed to deflate some of Marcus's anger, replaced by protective concern. He knelt down to Nia's level, his voice gentling. "Because sometimes people don't understand that their words can hurt others. But we're going to protect Mom, okay?" Elias stepped forward, his movement careful and measured. "Mr. Brooks, I understand your concerns. I've spent my life in the public eye. I know how cruel this attention can be. Let me help shield your family from it. I have resources, experience." "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." Marcus straightened up. Your resources, your experience, your world. It's going to swallow us whole, and I won't let that happen to my family." The garden that had felt so peaceful just hours ago now seemed to shrink under the weight of confrontation. The flowers that had represented hope now stood witness to fear and protective anger, their beauty forgotten in the face of harsh reality. Rochelle looked between the two men, her past and her present colliding in ways she'd never imagined. The careful steps toward healing she'd begun to take that morning now felt like dancing on quicksand. Every tabloid headline, every probing question, every suspicious glance threatened to drag her back into the darkness she'd spent years climbing out of. "I need time," she said finally, her voice cutting through the tension. It's too much, too fast. The reporters, the speculation, everything." She turned to Elias, seeing the pain flash across his face. "I'm not saying no to knowing you again, but I have to protect my family first. My life now. I need to find a way to do this that doesn't destroy everything I've built." The garden fell silent except for the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Above them, clouds began to gather, as if nature itself was reflecting the darkening mood. What had started as a morning of cautious hope had transformed into an afternoon of protective fears and difficult choices. Marcus kept his arm around his family, his stance protective but no longer aggressive. Elias stood alone by his carefully tended roses, looking suddenly older, the weight of another potential loss visible in the slump of his shoulders. And between them all, Nia watched with the silent wisdom of children, understanding more than any of them realized about the complex emotions swirling around her like autumn leaves in a storm. The evening air grew heavy with tension as darkness settled over the hospital wing. Machines beeped steadily in Elias's private suite, their green and blue lights casting strange shadows on the stark white walls. Earlier that day, what had started as a slight stumble during his afternoon walk had quickly turned into something far more serious. Rochelle paced the spotless floor, her shoes making soft, squeaking sounds against the tiles. The sound of Marcus's angry voice still echoed in her mind from their argument hours before. He had stormed off, saying he needed time to think. Now, watching Elias's chest rise and fall beneath the thin hospital blanket, Rochelle felt her world spinning out of control once again. Dr. Sarah Chen, Elias's personal physician, stood at the foot of the bed, her face grim as she held up a series of brain scans to the light. "The tumor has grown more aggressive than we anticipated," she explained, her voice gentle but direct. "We need to operate immediately." "But he was fine this morning," Rochelle whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She stopped pacing and gripped the metal rail of Elias's bed until her knuckles turned white. "He was showing us the garden. Brain tumors can be unpredictable," Dr. Chen said. "Sometimes patients can seem perfectly fine right until they're not." She lowered the scans and looked directly at Rochelle. "There's something else you need to know. The location of the tumor? It makes this surgery extremely delicate." Nia sat quietly in a corner armchair that was too big for her, her small hands folded in her lap. She watched the adults with wide, worried eyes, taking in every word, even though some of it was beyond her understanding. "What aren't you telling me?" Rochelle demanded, her voice cracking. Dr. Chen took a deep breath. "The surgery itself carries significant risks, but even if it's successful in removing the tumor, there's a very real possibility it could affect his memory. We might save his life, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He might not remember the last few days, or weeks, or even years." The words hit Rochelle like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, finding support against the wall. "He might not remember finding me," she said flatly. That's correct, Dr. Chen confirmed. And without surgery, the tumor will continue to grow. He has maybe weeks, at most. She glanced at her watch. I need your decision by morning. As his next of kin. Next of kin, Rochelle repeated with a bitter laugh. I've been his next of kin for less than a week. Nia stood up from her chair and walked over to her mother, slipping her small hand into Rochelle's. The simple gesture of comfort made Rochelle's eyes fill with tears. Can I have some time alone with him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen nodded and quietly left the room. Nia squeezed her mother's hand once more before letting go and walking to Elias's bedside. She stood on her tiptoes and whispered something in his ear that Rochelle couldn't quite hear. What did you say to him, baby? Rochelle asked. Nia turned, her face serious but peaceful. I told him I'll still bring him breakfast every morning, no matter what happens, even if he forgets who we are. She looked back at Elias. Maybe the eggs and toast will help him remember. Rochelle felt something break inside her chest. She crossed the room and pulled Nia into a tight hug, letting her tears fall freely now. All the anger she'd been holding on to, all the years of fear and resentment, seemed to crash against this moment of impossible choice. I don't know what to do, she admitted, speaking into her daughter's hair. If I let them do the surgery, he might forget everything. Forget finding us, forget who I am. But if I don't... She couldn't finish the sentence. Nia pulled back and looked up at her mother with those wise eyes that seemed to hold all the answers. Remember what you always tell me? About kindness? That it's a duty, not a favor. Rochelle finished, automatically. Maybe loving someone is like that too, Nia said softly. Even when it's hard. Rochelle looked at Elias lying there, suddenly seeming so much smaller than the powerful man who had emerged from that weathered house just days ago. She thought about all the years he'd spent searching for her, building an empire just to find her. And now, just when they'd finally found each other. She sank into the chair beside his bed, taking his hand in hers. It was warm, and she could feel his pulse, steady despite everything. Memories she didn't even know she had started surfacing. The smell of his aftershave when she was very small, the sound of his laugh, the way he used to call her Princess. The monitors continued their steady beeping as hours crept by. Nia had curled up in the armchair, finally giving in to sleep. But Rochelle stayed awake, holding her father's hand, torn between the past she'd lost and the future she might lose again. Around midnight, Elias stirred, his eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her face. Rochelle, he whispered. I'm here, she said, squeezing his hand. I'm sorry, he said, his voice weak but clear. I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. The words she'd been waiting decades to hear broke something loose inside her. She laid her head down on the bed beside their clasped hands and sobbed. For the little girl she'd been, for the father who'd never stopped searching, for all the years they'd lost. The doctors say they need to operate in the morning, she told him when she could speak again. But Dad, you might not remember any of this afterward. You might not remember finding me. A tear slid down Elias's cheek. I spent 30 years looking for you, he said. Even if I forget, my heart will know you. It always has. Rochelle stayed by his side through the night, watching the clock tick closer to morning. Nia woke before dawn, as she always did, and came to stand beside them. Together, they watched the sun rise through the hospital window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. When Dr. Chen returned at 7 o'clock sharp, Rochelle was ready with her answer. She had made her choice, not out of rage or love, but out of something deeper, the same quiet strength that had helped her survive all these years, the same wisdom her daughter showed every morning with a simple breakfast delivery. The surgical team began their preparations, efficient and focused. As they wheeled Elias toward the operating room, Nia reached out and touched his hand one last time. "Don't forget about breakfast," she whispered. "I'll be waiting." The morning arrived like a heavy blanket, thick with tension and unspoken fears. Rochelle sat in the sterile hospital waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights making everything feel too bright, too real. Her fingers traced the edges of yet another consent form, the fifth one she'd had to sign in the past hour. The black ink seemed to mock her with its permanence, each signature feeling like both a promise and a betrayal. "Mrs. Brooks?" A nurse in pale blue scrubs approached with another clipboard. "Just one more form for the anesthesia protocol." Rochelle's hand trembled as she reached for the pen. The words on the page blurred together, medical terms swimming before her eyes. Risk of adverse reaction, possible complications, memory loss. Each phrase felt like a punch to her gut. Marcus stood beside her, his solid presence grounding her in reality. He'd been quiet all morning, watching her struggle with decisions no daughter should have to make. The anger that had blazed in his eyes yesterday had softened into something gentler, more understanding. "Hey," he said softly, placing his hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone." Tears welled up in Rochelle's eyes. "I just found him, Marcus. What if—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but the weight of it hung in the air between them. Marcus knelt in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Look at me, Rochelle." His voice was steady, certain. "Whatever happens in there, we're family. All of us. Even him." The admission cost him something. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened. But he meant every word. It was the first time he'd acknowledged Elias as anything other than a threat to their stability. Down the hall, Nia sat cross-legged in a corner chair, her small hands clasped in prayer. She hadn't stopped praying since dawn, her whispered words a constant rhythm. "Please let Grandpa remember. Please let him be okay." The waiting room filled slowly as morning crept toward noon. Elias's medical team arrived in waves, specialists from around the world, each carrying tablets filled with scans and charts. They spoke in hushed tones about surgical approaches and contingency plans. A tall doctor with kind eyes approached Rochelle. "Mrs. Brooks, we're ready to begin prepping your father for surgery. Would you like to see him before we start?" Rochelle nodded, unable to speak. Marcus squeezed her hand before letting go. "We'll be right here," he promised. The walk to the pre-op room felt endless. Each step echoed against the polished floors, marking time that suddenly seemed too precious to waste. When she entered, Elias was already in a hospital gown, looking smaller somehow against the white sheets. "There's my girl," he said softly, reaching for her hand. His skin felt paper-thin, but his grip was strong. "Dad?" Rochelle started, the word still new and fragile on her tongue. "I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart." He patted the edge of the bed, and she sat carefully beside him. "But you need to know something, even if—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Even if I wake up and don't remember our reunion, nothing can take away the fact that I found you, that you're my daughter. That's written in my heart, not just my mind." Rochelle bent forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder like she might have done as a child, if things had been different. "I wasted so much time being angry." "No time loving is ever wasted," Elias said firmly. "Promise me something? Tell Nia the story of her stubborn grandfather who never gave up looking for his little girl. Tell her about the garden I planted, waiting for you to come home." Before Rochelle could answer, the surgical team entered. It was time. She kissed his forehead, inhaling the faint scent of his aftershave, memorizing the moment. Back in the waiting room, hours stretched like taffy. Marcus paced, his shoes squeaking against the floor. Nia had fallen asleep, curled up across 3 chairs with Marcus's jacket as a blanket. Rochelle sat perfectly still, watching the clock tick past 1 o'clock, then 2, then 3. Hospital staff brought coffee and sandwiches that no one touched. Well-wishers sent flowers that filled the room with a sweetness that felt out of place. Rochelle's phone buzzed constantly with messages from reporters seeking updates, but she ignored them all. As the afternoon light began to fade, Marcus finally stopped pacing. He pulled a chair close to Rochelle and took her hand. "Remember our first apartment?" he asked suddenly. Rochelle looked at him, surprised by the change of subject. "That tiny place above the laundromat?" "Yeah. Remember how scared we were? 2 kids with nothing but dreams and determination." He smiled softly. "But we made it work. We always make it work." She understood what he was trying to say. They'd faced impossible things before and survived. They would survive this too, whatever happened. "I'm sorry I got so defensive." Marcus continued. "I was afraid of losing what we built, but I see now, love doesn't divide, it multiplies." Rochelle leaned against his shoulder, drawing strength from his steadiness. "When did you get so wise?" "About the same time I realized that protecting our family sometimes means letting it grow." At 5:17, the double doors at the end of the hall swung open. The surgeon emerged, still wearing his scrub cap, his face carefully neutral. Rochelle stood on shaky legs, Marcus's arm around her waist, keeping her upright. The surgeon approached slowly, removing his mask. The whole room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for words that could shatter or heal. "The surgery was complex," he began. "But your father is stable. We were able to remove the mass while preserving the surrounding tissue." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "The next 24 hours will be critical, but there's reason to be hopeful." Rochelle felt her knees buckle slightly. Hope. It wasn't certainty, but it was something to hold on to, something to build on. Marcus's arm tightened around her waist, supporting her weight as relief flooded through her body. Nia stirred from her sleep, blinking in confusion. "Is Grandpa okay?" The surgeon smiled at her. "He's sleeping now, but he fought hard, just like I hear everyone in your family does." Rochelle thought about that word. Family. How it had expanded and contracted throughout her life, shaped by loss and love, fear and forgiveness. Now it was growing again, making room for new possibilities, new healing, new hope. The steady beep of medical monitors filled the sterile hospital room. Rochelle Brooks sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her body tense, but refusing to leave her father's side. Elias Whitmore lay motionless in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting him to various machines that tracked his vital signs. The surgery had ended 4 hours ago, but he hadn't stirred since. Outside the window, city lights twinkled against the darkening sky. Rochelle pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders, fighting off the perpetual chill of hospital air conditioning. Her eyes traced the lines of Elias's face, familiar now in a way that stirred long-buried memories. "The doctors say you did well," she whispered, her voice rough from hours of worry. "They're hopeful, but they won't know about—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The possibility that he might wake up without remembering her was too painful to voice. Marcus had taken Nia home an hour ago, promising to bring her back at dawn. Their daughter had been reluctant to leave, her small face pinched with concern as she kissed her grandfather's cheek goodbye. "I'll bring your breakfast tomorrow," Nia had promised him softly, just like always. Rochelle reached for the worn leather bag beside her chair. Inside was a small photo album she'd brought from home, one of the few possessions she'd managed to hold on to through years of moving from place to place. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "I don't know if you can hear me," she began, "but there are things I want to tell you. Things I remembered, even though I tried so hard to forget." She turned to the first page, where a crayon drawing was carefully preserved behind plastic. "I drew this when I was 6. It's our old house, the yellow one with the red door. You used to say the door was that bright so you'd never lose your way home." Her finger traced the childish scrawl at the bottom. "For Daddy." The memory brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them away and continued. "There was a swing set in the backyard. You built it yourself, even though Mom said we could just buy one. You spent 3 weekends getting it perfect." Rochelle's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "Every Sunday, you'd push me so high I thought I could touch the clouds. I wasn't scared because I knew you'd never let me fall." The monitors beeped steadily as she turned another page. This one held a faded ticket stub from a carnival. "Remember the summer fair? I was 8, and you let me ride the Ferris wheel 5 times in a row. We ate cotton candy until our tongues turned blue, and you won me that ridiculous stuffed giraffe that was bigger than I was." A nurse came in to check Elias's vitals, moving quietly around the bed. Rochelle paused until she left, then continued her storytelling. Each memory seemed to unlock another, flowing out like water from a broken dam. "There was this lullaby you used to sing. I couldn't remember the words for so long, but today they came back to me." Her voice softened as she hummed a few notes. "Something about moonbeams and starlight. You sang it every night, even after I said I was too old for lullabies." She shifted in her chair, reaching out to touch his hand. His skin felt cool against her warm fingers. The day it happened, you were supposed to pick me up from school. I waited on the steps forever, getting more and more worried. Now I know you were frantically searching the city for me, but back then..." Her voice cracked. "Back then I thought you'd forgotten me." The night deepened outside the window. Hospital staff moved quietly past in the hallway, their shadows sliding across the floor. Rochelle pulled out another photo, this one showing a little girl in a blue dress, missing her front teeth. "This was my first piano recital. I played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and messed up the middle part, but you clapped louder than anyone. You told me it was the best version you'd ever heard." She placed the photo on his blanket. "I took piano lessons again in high school. Different name, different city. But I still remembered how you taught me to position my hands." Hours passed as Rochelle continued reading through her childhood, sharing pieces of their shared past that had survived despite everything. She told him about the treehouse he'd planned to build, the Saturday morning pancake traditions, the way he always checked under her bed for monsters. "I was so angry when I first saw you again," she admitted into the quiet room. "Angry that you were just living down the street. Angry that you found me through Nia instead of years ago. But now..." She squeezed his hand gently. "Now I understand that you never stopped looking. You never forgot me." The night stretched on, marked by regular visits from nurses and the constant rhythm of monitoring equipment. Rochelle's voice grew hoarse, but she kept talking, afraid that silence would swallow the memories she'd finally allowed herself to reclaim. "Nia reminds me so much of myself at that age," she said softly. "She has the same heart, the same way of caring for people. That comes from you, I think. That's your legacy, even though we were apart for so long." She glanced at her watch. 3:45 in the morning. Soon the sun would rise, and Nia would return with her faithful breakfast delivery. The thought brought a tired smile to Rochelle's face. "You have to wake up," she whispered fiercely. "You have to remember. We have so much time to make up for, so many new memories to create. Nia needs her grandfather, and She swallowed hard. I need my father. The machines continued their steady rhythm, marking each moment of the long night. Rochelle settled back, in her chair, still holding Elias's hand, and waited for dawn. The first rays of sunlight crept through the hospital window, painting warm stripes across the sterile floor. The night shift nurses were making their final rounds, their soft footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Inside room 412, Rochelle sat in the same chair she'd occupied for hours, her hand still resting on her father's arm, though her head had dropped forward in exhaustion. The gentle click of the door opening made her stir. Nia stepped inside, carrying her familiar cloth-wrapped bundle. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but she moved with the same careful grace she showed every morning. Today's breakfast, still warm toast, scrambled eggs, and fresh fruit, gave off a comforting aroma that seemed to chase away some of the hospital's antiseptic smell. "Mom," Nia whispered, placing the breakfast tray on the bedside table. "I brought enough for everyone." Rochelle straightened in her chair, wincing at her stiff muscles. "Thank you, sweetheart. You should have slept longer." "I couldn't." Nia moved to stand beside her mother, looking at Elias's still form. "It wouldn't be right to break our breakfast tradition now." The morning light grew stronger, filling the room with a golden glow. Nia arranged 3 paper plates and plastic utensils on the rolling table, just as she had done countless mornings on Elias's front porch. The familiar routine felt both strange and perfectly right in this new setting. "Good morning," Nia said clearly, her voice carrying the same cheerful tone she used every day. She wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. It was simply part of her ritual, as natural as breathing. A subtle change rippled through the room. Elias's fingers twitched against the white hospital sheets. His eyelids fluttered, fighting against the weight of anesthesia and exhaustion. Rochelle leaned forward, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Slowly, painfully slowly, Elias opened his eyes. For a moment, confusion clouded his face. He blinked several times, gaze wandering around the unfamiliar room. The machines beeped steadily, marking each second of uncertainty. Rochelle's grip tightened on his arm, fear closing her throat. Then Elias's eyes found Nia. The change was immediate and profound. Recognition sparked in his expression like a sunrise breaking through clouds. His lips curved into a weak but unmistakable smile, and he whispered, "Nia." Rochelle's legs gave out. She collapsed back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. Nia rushed to hit the call button, and within moments the room filled with medical staff. The doctor performed quick neurological tests, asking Elias simple questions about his name, the date, and his location. "Miss Brooks," the doctor said, turning to Rochelle with a warm smile. "Your father's memory appears fully intact. The surgery was successful in both removing the tumor and preserving his cognitive functions." Rochelle couldn't speak. She pressed her hands to her mouth, trying to contain the sob that threatened to escape. Nia wrapped her arms around her mother's shoulders, holding her close as years of tension finally released. "My girls," Elias said softly, his voice rough from the breathing tube but filled with love. "Both my girls." The medical team quietly withdrew, leaving the family alone. Sunlight now filled the room completely, warming the space that had felt so cold and uncertain through the long night. Nia began serving breakfast, carefully cutting the toast into manageable pieces for her grandfather. "I remembered," Elias said, accepting a small bite of egg. "I heard everything you read last night, Rochelle. Every memory." Fresh tears spilled down Rochelle's cheeks. "You weren't supposed to be conscious yet." "I wasn't fully awake," he admitted, "but I heard your voice. It guided me back." He reached for her hand, his grip weak but determined. "I'm so sorry I couldn't find you sooner. You never stopped looking," Rochelle whispered, repeating the words she'd said during her nighttime vigil. "That's what matters now." Nia watched them both, her young face glowing with quiet joy. She continued serving breakfast, making sure everyone had equal portions, just as she'd done every morning. The simple act of sharing food, this small tradition that had brought them all together, felt sacred in the morning light. "Your breakfast deliveries," Aaliyah said to Nia. "They saved more than just an old man's lonely mornings. They saved our whole family." Nia smiled, remembering her mother's words from so long ago. Kindness was a duty, not a favor. She hadn't known then how profound that simple lesson would prove to be. The family sat together in the warm morning light, sharing breakfast and gentle conversation. They were different people than they had been just days ago, no longer strangers bound by simple kindness, but family bound by love, forgiveness, and the promise of new memories to come. The path ahead would not be easy, but they would walk it together, step by step, day by day, breakfast by breakfast. The wounds of the past had not vanished, but they had begun to heal. In that hospital room, as morning light streamed through the windows and the simple breakfast was shared, they were whole, fragile, but whole. The rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors marked time like a steady heartbeat through the sterile corridors. Morning light streamed through the window of room 312, casting gentle shadows across the crisp white sheets where Elias Whitmore rested. The first rays touched his face just as Nia Brooks pushed open the heavy door, carrying her familiar cloth-wrapped breakfast bundle. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying the same warmth it had held during all those quiet mornings on his porch. Elias's eyes fluttered open, focus sharpening as he recognized her. A smile spread across his face, tired but genuine. "Nia," he whispered, his voice rough from days of limited use. "You're still bringing breakfast." Rochelle, who had dozed off in the bedside chair, stirred at their voices. Dark circles rimmed her eyes from nights spent watching over her father, but relief had softened the worry lines that had creased her face during the surgery. "She wouldn't have it any other way," Rochelle said, stretching carefully. 3 days straight now, rain or shine." Nia carefully arranged the breakfast items on the adjustable hospital tray. Toast, still warm from home, fresh fruit, and a thermos of tea that the nurses had agreed could supplement the hospital's standard fare. "The doctor said you need to keep up your strength," she explained seriously, positioning the tray just so. "And hospital food isn't as good as home cooking." Marcus Brooks appeared in the doorway, coffee cups in hand. The initial tension in his shoulders had eased over the past few days as he watched his wife reconnect with her father and his daughter, show them all what unconditional love looked like. He passed a cup to Rochelle, who accepted it with a grateful smile. "How are you feeling today, sir?" Marcus asked, his tone respectful, but no longer guarded. Elias adjusted himself higher against his pillows, movements careful but stronger than the day before. "Better. Much better." He glanced at the legal documents on his bedside table. "Strong enough for some important work today." Rochelle followed his gaze, anxiety flickering across her features. "Dad, the doctor said not to rush things." "This can't wait," Elias said gently. "Some things need to be put right while we have the chance." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, their matching eyes meeting. "I've asked my attorneys to prepare everything. It's time to make it official. All of it." A nurse entered, clipboard in hand, checking vital signs with practiced efficiency. "Looking good, Mr. Whitmore," she said, noting numbers on her chart. "Blood pressure's normal, temperature steady, She smiled at Nia. I see our special breakfast delivery service is right on schedule. Nia beamed, carefully pouring tea into the hospital-approved cup. He needs real food to get better faster. The nurse patted her shoulder. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. Keep it up. As the nurse left, Marcus moved closer to the bed, one hand resting protectively on Rochelle's shoulder. What exactly are you planning, Mr. Whitmore? Please. Elias said. Call me Elias. We're family. He took a careful sip of tea before continuing. I'm updating my will, of course, but more importantly, I'm filing papers to legally acknowledge Rochelle as my daughter and heir. Everything will be in her name, the company, the properties, all of it. Rochelle's grip on his hand tightened. That's not necessary. It is. Elias interrupted firmly. It's your birthright. What should have been yours all along? His voice softened. I know it won't make up for the lost years, but it's a start. Marcus cleared his throat. Sir, Elias, that's an overwhelming responsibility to put on someone. Which is why I've arranged for a transition team. Elias explained. The best advisors, teachers, whatever support Rochelle needs to understand and manage everything. No pressure, no rush. She can be as involved or hands-off as she chooses. He looked at Marcus directly. Your family's privacy and independence will be protected. I promise you that. Nia, who had been quietly arranging fruit on a plate, spoke up. Does this mean we have to move to a big house? The adults exchanged glances, and Rochelle pulled her daughter close. No, baby. We don't have to do anything we don't want to do. Good, Nia said decisively, because I like our house, and I like bringing breakfast here. She paused thoughtfully. But maybe Grandpa could come visit us sometimes instead. Elias's eyes grew misty at the word Grandpa. I'd like that very much, he managed. A gentle knock announced the arrival of Elias's attorneys, carrying folders of documents. The lead lawyer, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, smiled at the group. Is this a good time to review everything? Rochelle took a deep breath, squeezing both her father's hand and her husband's. Yes, she said quietly. I think it is. As the lawyers began explaining the documents, Nia continued serving breakfast, making sure everyone had tea and toast. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the room as family bonds strengthened with each passing moment. The hospital monitors kept their steady rhythm, marking not just Elias's healing heart, but the healing of 3 generations brought together by a child's simple act of kindness. Marcus watched his wife initial page after page, seeing not defeat in her acceptance of her heritage, but a growing peace. The wealth and responsibility weren't erasing who they were adding to it, expanding their ability to do good in the world. Like Nia's breakfasts, it was a gift freely given, asking nothing in return but love. The morning passed in a blur of signatures and quiet conversations. Nurses came and went, checking vitals and changing IVs. Through it all, Nia maintained her self-appointed role as breakfast hostess, refilling teacups and making sure no one went hungry. The simple ritual grounded them all, a reminder that family wasn't built on legal documents or inherited wealth, but on small daily acts of care and attention. By early afternoon, Elias's energy was flagging, though his eyes shone with satisfaction as the last paper was signed. Rochelle was officially acknowledged as his daughter and heir, with carefully structured provisions to protect her family's privacy and autonomy. The future was secured, but not imposed, a gift of possibility rather than obligation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital parking lot as Rochelle helped Elias into the waiting car. 3 weeks had passed since the surgery, and each day brought small victories. First steps down the hallway, then short walks in the hospital garden, and finally, today's discharge. Are you comfortable? Rochelle adjusted the pillow behind his back, her movements careful but no longer hesitant. Elias smiled, the expression warming his tired face. More than comfortable? He patted her hand. And more grateful than I can say. Nia bounced in the seat beside him, still carrying her signature breakfast container. Grandpa, did you eat the toast I brought? The nurse said you need your strength. Every crumb, Elias assured her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The word grandpa still brought tears to his eyes, though he tried to hide them. Marcus drove carefully, watching his father-in-law in the rearview mirror. The past weeks had softened his initial fears. He'd seen how Elias refused interviews, turned away documentary crews, and focused solely on healing, both physically and as a family. At the sprawling office building downtown, Rochelle helped Elias into his private conference room. The space felt different now, warmer, more human. Family photos had replaced corporate awards on the walls, including one of Nia's recent school pictures. Are you sure about this? Rochelle asked, settling into a chair beside him. It's a huge undertaking. Elias nodded, spreading papers across the polished table. I've spent decades building wealth, searching for you. Now it's time to help others find their way home. The foundation documents lay before them, carefully crafted over weeks of discussion. The Missing Children's Hope Foundation, dedicated to supporting search efforts, counseling survivors, and preventing abductions through education and community outreach. Co-director? Rochelle read her title aloud, fingers tracing the words. Elias, I don't know the first thing about running a foundation. You know what matters most, he replied softly. You understand the fear, the loneliness, the strength it takes to survive. Your experience is worth more than any business degree. Nia peered at the papers, her face serious. Will you help other kids like Mom? That's exactly what we'll do, Elias explained, pulling her close. And their families too. Sometimes people need help remembering who they are, where they belong. The Foundation's first initiative was already taking shape. Across the city, billboards appeared without fanfare, not announcing Elias's fortune or Rochelle's return, but offering hope and resources for other searching families. Later that afternoon, their car turned onto the familiar street where it had all begun. The modest houses looked smaller now, dwarfed by memory and meaning. Elias's weathered home stood waiting, its paint still peeling in places. Neighbors gathered on porches and sidewalks, drawn by quiet curiosity rather than media circus. These were the people who had watched Nia's morning walks, who had wondered about the old man in the corner house, who had been part of the story without knowing it. Elias stood straighter as he addressed them, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. This house, he began, has been a shelter of secrets for too long. Now it's time for it to serve a better purpose. The plans were already drawn. Meeting rooms where support groups could gather, counseling offices, a play area for children whose families needed a safe space to heal. The old kitchen where Nia had delivered countless breakfasts would become a gathering spot for community meals. Mrs. Chen from next door dabbed her eyes with a tissue. All those mornings, she said, watching that little girl bring breakfast. Who knew she was delivering hope instead of toast? Rochelle wrapped an arm around Nia's shoulders. She always knew kindness mattered, even when the rest of us forgot. Inside the house, Elias moved slowly from room to room, touching walls that had witnessed his loneliest years. I chose this place, he admitted, because it reminded me of our old home, where you were taken. I thought maybe if I waited long enough, history would reverse itself. And it did, Rochelle said quietly, just not the way you expected. Marcus helped Elias settle into his old armchair one last time. The room around them was already changing. Contractors would arrive tomorrow, but the transformation had begun weeks ago, when truth broke through decades of silence. "No more waiting," Elias declared, looking at his family. "No more living in the past. This place will help write new stories now." Nia explored the house with fresh eyes, imagining the changes to come. "Can I still visit?" she asked. "Maybe bring breakfast for the kids who come here?" "Of course," Elias smiled. "Some traditions are worth keeping." Outside, the neighborhood seemed to exhale, as if releasing years of held breath. The mystery of the old man's house had given way to something better: purpose, healing, community. Children played on the sidewalk where news vans had once clustered, their laughter replacing the buzz of cameras. Rochelle walked through the garden one last time, remembering her first adult glimpse of Elias on that life-changing morning. The fear and anger that had gripped her then had slowly transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. The path forward wasn't about forgetting the past, but about giving it new meaning. The Foundation's first meeting was scheduled for the following week. Already families had reached out, some searching, some found, all carrying stories that echoed Rochelle's own. She had spent hours reading their letters, recognizing in each one the same longing for connection that had brought her daughter to Elias's door with breakfast. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the familiar street, Elias took one final look at the house. "It was worth it," he said softly. "Every moment of waiting, every dead end, every morning. Breakfast, it was all worth it." The family drove away together, leaving behind a house that would no longer stand empty, no longer hold secrets. In its place would grow something new, a testament to the power of persistence, the strength of healing, and the simple magic of breakfast shared between strangers who become family. The morning air felt different somehow as Nia Brooks walked down the familiar street, her breakfast basket swinging gently in her hands. The weight was heavier now, not just toast and eggs for one, but a proper family breakfast for four. Steam rose from the carefully wrapped containers inside, carrying the scent of fresh coffee, warm pancakes, and hope. The old weathered house at the end of the street had changed too. Fresh paint brightened its walls, and flower boxes hung beneath windows that now sparkled in the early sunlight. But the biggest change wasn't on the outside, it was the warmth that radiated from within. Nia paused at the front steps, remembering all those quiet mornings when she'd left food for a lonely man. Now, voices and laughter spilled through the open windows. She smiled, pushed open the door without knocking, and called out, "Breakfast delivery." "There's my girl!" Elias Whitmore's voice carried from the dining room, stronger now after his recovery. He sat at the head of a large oak table, newspapers spread before him, but forgotten as he watched his family gather. Rochelle Brooks, now known to the world as Rochelle Whitmore Brooks, was already setting out plates, moving with an ease that had taken weeks to develop. The tension that once held her shoulders tight had melted away, replaced by a gentle grace. "Perfect timing, sweetheart," she said, helping Nia unpack the basket. Marcus Brooks entered from the kitchen, carrying a pitcher of orange juice. His initial wariness of wealth and change had softened into acceptance, especially after seeing how Elias had handled everything with quiet dignity rather than flashy displays. "Something smells amazing," he said, kissing the top of Nia's head as he passed. The sunlight streamed through the windows, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. It caught the silver in Elias's hair, the warm brown of Rochelle's eyes, the gentle smile on Marcus's face, and the joy radiating from Nia as she took her seat. "I made extra blueberry pancakes," Nia announced proudly, since they're Grandpa's favorite. The word Grandpa still brought tears to Elias's eyes, though he tried to hide them behind his coffee cup. It had taken time for everyone to find their proper names, their proper places. But like the morning light filling every corner of the room, love had a way of seeping into all the empty spaces. Rochelle reached across the table and squeezed her father's hand. "You're getting soft, Dad," she teased, using the word that had once felt impossible to say. "Guilty as charged," Elias replied, his voice rough with emotion. He looked around the table at the family he'd searched so long to find, the family that had unknowingly found him first through simple acts of kindness. They ate together, passing plates and sharing stories. The conversation flowed easily now, no longer hindered by secrets or fear. Marcus talked about his plans for the community center that would soon occupy this house. Rochelle discussed the Foundation's latest success in reuniting another missing child with their family. Nia proudly showed off her latest school art project. And Elias? He mostly listened, soaking in every moment like a man who had walked through desert, finally reaching an oasis. His medical prognosis was good, his memory intact. But he knew better than anyone how precious these moments were. "Remember when you used to wrap everything in that red checkered cloth?" Nia asked, helping herself to more pancakes. "I still have it, you know. The first one you gave me to bring breakfast in." "I remember," Rochelle said softly. "I taught you that. Kindness was a duty, not a favor. I never knew then." She paused, emotion catching in her throat. "I never knew that simple lesson would lead us here." "That's the thing about kindness," Elias said, his eyes twinkling. "It has a way of finding its mark, even when we can't see the target. Your mother taught you well, Nia, and you taught all of us." Marcus nodded, reaching for Rochelle's hand. "You sure did, baby girl. You showed us that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest actions." Sunlight filled the room completely now, warming them all. The morning birds sang outside, and somewhere down the street, a neighbor called out a cheerful greeting to another. Life continued its normal rhythm, but here, in this room, something extraordinary had bloomed from the seeds of daily kindness. "I was thinking," Nia said, carefully folding her napkin, "maybe we could invite Mrs. Johnson from next door tomorrow. She lives alone too, and her smile always looks a little sad." The adults exchanged glances, recognizing in Nia's words the same compassion that had brought them all together. The cycle of kindness continuing, growing, reaching out to touch more lives. "That's a wonderful idea," Elias said, his voice full of pride. "There's always room for one more at this table." As they finished their breakfast together, the morning light seemed to embrace them all, a family once fractured by darkness now whole in the warmth of day. The past was no longer a shadow lurking in corners, but a story they could share. The future wasn't a thing to fear, but a path they would walk together. And there, in that sun-filled room, over simple pancakes and coffee, they were living proof that kindness, offered faithfully without expectation, held the power to heal even the deepest wounds, to bridge the widest gaps, and to resurrect love that had been buried but never truly lost. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.